An egogram is not a table for easily classifying people. It is not a tool for deciding who is better or worse. An egogram is closer to a map. It helps us read what kind of climate a person has lived in, what energy they have lost, and what energy they have come to use more. So at some point, numbers move beyond simple scores. They begin to turn into sentences that show a person's life. Long ago, during an egogram analysis lecture for several families in Suwon, Gyeonggi-do, one middle school girl's egogram caught my eye among many result sheets. Her graph was very different from those of her peers. All of her ego state scores were far below average. The graph looked like a nearly flat plane close to the floor, as if almost no emotional voltage remained. During the lecture, tears suddenly fell from my eyes as I looked at that graph. The lecture hall became silent as if cold water had been poured over it. The reason I cried was not that the numbers were low. It was because between those low numbers, I could see the deep silence the child had endured alone. I said carefully, "I can hardly feel parental warmth in this graph. It seems your parents may be far away or not beside you, so their influence has barely reached you." Then I gently asked the child, "Are you perhaps living alone with your grandmother now?" The child quietly nodded. She was truly living alone with her grandmother, without her parents. After confirming that fact, I did not continue analyzing the girl. At that moment, I felt that it was more important not to expose the child's pain further in front of many people than to continue the interpretation. Reading an egogram requires more than accuracy. Consideration must always come before analysis. Numbers mark coordinates. But how we handle the life contained in those coordinates ultimately depends on the attitude of the reader. Why was that child's graph so low? CP and NP are deeply connected to how a child has received standards and protection, warmth and care. The fact that these scores were close to the floor shows the possibility that the climate of parents had barely operated in the child's life. When parents are not beside a child, when they are emotionally too far away, or when neglect continues for a long time, the child may not receive enough fuel to move the mind. In such cases, the graph is not simply low. It leaves traces of a heart that could not sufficiently lean on someone, learn from someone, or be warmed by someone. This scene shows very clearly what an egogram is a tool for reading. An egogram reads numbers, but it also reads the absence of relationships and the traces of climate left inside those numbers. Data may look cold, but the life held inside that data is never cold. In part 0, we took the test, met the 6 ego states, learned the basics of interpretation, and looked at actual cases. And now we begin to understand a little. Reading an egogram means reading a graph, and at the same time reading how life made that graph. A low score may not simply be a deficiency. It may be a trace of a heart that has not been warmed for a long time. A high score may not simply be a problem. It may be a state where very strong energy has not yet met the right direction. A graph different from the average is not a strange graph. It may be a record of that person's own climate, adaptation, and survival. So, what matters is not the score itself. What matters is what scenes that score passed through before it was formed. It is where that energy is flowing now. And it is how that energy can be adjusted going forward. The reason we meet people with a map called an egogram is not to diagnose them, but to understand them. Not carelessly touching the silence of low scores, changing the direction of overheated scores, and reconnecting still living resources with life. That is what Torbit TA calls adjustment. Fixing the person is not the first step. What is needed first is to read what structure the person has endured with and what resources they can rise again with. The egogram becomes that starting point.